Good morning. This is the Trent Show. Thanks for joining me this Monday morning. It is the beginning of the third week of the Oklahoma legislative session, and today we're going to talk about education because there is a slew of education bills up at the legislature. I'm just pulling one of these up right now on the computer. There are committee hearings starting off, you're taking up a lot of these bills this week, and look, legislators need to hear from you because legislators are definitely going to hear from tax consumers, from adults who have an interest in the system. Anytime government creates a system, this is not, again, I say this all the time, but it's important to say it because some people have thin skins and some people want to mischaracterize the position of people who just believe in limited government and freedom. Every time government sets up a program, there are always people who benefit from it who are employed by the program, right? And that's not a personal slight on them, but it's an important observation. No realistic, no rational conversation about politics is complete unless you acknowledge that fact, right? There are incentives for people to support the status quo, to support pouring more money into the status quo, and look, I mean that's not the only reason why people might be against freedom. It's not the only reason why people might want higher taxes, bigger government, more control over kids by politicians. There are also ideological reasons why people want that. But we shouldn't blind ourselves to the fact that there are also just very practical dollar and cents reasons why people oppose policies like more customization in education, making education more child-centered, and making sure that our educational system actually upholds the principle of parental rights, right? These are basic, fundamental values that most Oklahomans share, but there are a lot of people trying to do what they can to stifle the expression of those positions in Oklahoma policy. But first off, let's start off with a couple of stories from around the world, also about freedom or the lack of it in China. We covered last year on the Trent England Show the Chinese Party Conference, right? And we've talked about the fact, I mean, all of the fascinating things that happen when you allow the people who want big government. I mean, that's communism, totalitarianism is the ultimate expression of big government. It's the ultimate big government. That's what they have in China. Some Americans like it. Some Oklahomans want us to be more like China. They want politicians to have more control. It's a fascinating system. It's a debate worth having because we do see people like Bernie Sanders winning primaries in even the state of Oklahoma. But in China, they are now moving to allow the premier to serve, essentially the president of China, right, to serve more than 2 5-year terms. The current limit is 2 5-year terms. 10 years, that's a long time, right? That's not a short time to be in the executive office of a giant nation like China, but they're moving to extend that so that he can extend his term and his power in China. So there you go. I mean, this is something we've seen all around Central America and South America, right? You get these executives in these left-wing states, whether they're socialist or communist, whether they're outright totalitarian or they pretend to be something else. And, if that's your ideology, right, ultimately you're not going to believe in limits on your power, and we see that expressed right now in what's going on in China. Meanwhile, the Bernie Sanders of Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party, and we've described this before. I mean, he makes Bernie Sanders look like a softie because Jeremy Corbyn has all of these ties. I mean, Bernie Sanders has some too, but Jeremy Corbyn has all of these ties to radical socialist and communist and other just left-wing movements and governments. And it came out last week that he actually had been in contact with agents of the Czech government back when Czechoslovakia was behind the Iron Curtain. Jeremy Corbyn had been, like Senator Ted Kennedy here in the United States, Senator Kennedy was in contact with representatives of the KGB. Jeremy Corbyn was in contact with spies for Czechoslovakia. That is sort of roiling British politics, with the Labour Party basically coming out in full-throated support of their leader, Jeremy Corbyn. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays the next time they have an election in Britain. Okay, let's get a little bit closer to education. Here's our bridge story. This is not a story about Oklahoma. It's not even a story about K-12 schools, but it is a story about education, and it's a topic that I personally follow because, well, it applies to me, or it at least applied to me in the past. It's about law schools. Headline over at CNBC last week, only 23% of law school grads say their education was worth the cost. Less than a quarter. That's terrible. And you know what's happened there? I mean, I wind up talking with young people about going to law school with some frequency. I like having the conversation. And let me tell you, I love law school. I've never been a practicing lawyer, but I love law school. But one of the things that helped me love law school is I minimized how much I spent on it. And I'll tell you a secret. Sometimes people hate it when I say this, because people get so stressed out over applications to colleges and universities and grad programs and law schools and whatever it is. I only applied to one law school because I knew, I did the math, I did the economics, and I said, look, this is the cheapest of the law schools that I really want to go to, and I think it's a good fit for me. And it's not worth it to go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt, especially when I wanted to keep working in public policy. I didn't want to go work at some big white shoe firm. I'd seen that movie with Tom Cruise, and that stuff scared me to death, right? So I wanted to stay in politics where people are, well, I don't know. But look, the reason why, this is going right to the heart of the education debate in Oklahoma, I promise you. The reason why most of these graduates of law schools are upset, or at least don't believe their education was worth the cost, is not so much what they got. It's the cost, right? The fact that we see people saying, because this didn't used to be the case, by the way. I mean, most lawyers used to view it as being worth the cost to go to law school. What's changed? The education hasn't changed. What's changed is the cost. The cost has gone up a lot, just like we've seen for undergraduate degrees, and just like we've seen in K-12 education. It's the cost. And here's the point. Here's the important point. We have all of these education debates, all of these, can I use the S word? I'm going to use the S word. We have all of these stupid education debates where politicians actually believe that the way that you make education better is to make it more expensive. There's no other way to say, I don't know if I can say it any other way. It's just stupid. I mean, these people are stupid. I'm going to say it. I'm sorry. Because look, making education more expensive brings the value down, right? If you make education more expensive and it doesn't get better, you're making education worse because you're getting the same thing at a higher cost. We all understand that. It's basic economics. Right? What's wrong with politicians and with the other people who make this argument, and what's wrong with us when we buy it? Because a lot of us do part of the time, right? They literally tell us we're going to make education better by making it more expensive. We should instantly, if you go into the appliance store, you say, I want to buy a refrigerator, and they say, well, we got two models. We got this one, we got that one. They're basically the same. You should buy this one. It's more expensive. Right? You're going to walk out of there. You're not going to buy anything from somebody who looks at the world that way, or who wants to convince you to look at the world that way. Right? Because either they're nuts or they're trying to pull a scam on you. Either they're nuts or they're trying to pull a scam on you when they argue that making something more expensive makes it better. It does exactly the opposite. That's the point, right? Law school, the legal education hasn't changed. Law schools basically teach the same thing as they did 10 years or 20 years ago. It's actually gotten a little bit better because of the pressure put on law schools by Ed Meese, Attorney General Ed Meese in the 1980s, actually pressured a lot of law schools to kind of turn back to actually teaching about the Constitution, right? So legal education maybe even gotten a little bit better in the last 20 or 30 years. But the costs have gone up so much that you have these young lawyers looking back and saying, I made the wrong choice. And many of them did make the wrong choice not because the education is not a wonderful education. Again, I loved it. I love the law. I think it's a tremendous education. But at some price point, it's not worth it. Okay, so let's get to Oklahoma. We have all of these bills. They're going to be heard in committees this week. Let me start with a good one. Let me start with a good one because it's something we've talked about here on the show. This is Representative Caldwell. This is House Bill 3539, and it would back the state a little bit, not entirely. We could go further, should go further, but it would back the state a little bit out of the teacher salary schedule process, right? It would say, look, there's a minimum salary schedule. You can't pay below the minimum. But beyond that, the state is not going to dictate, well, this many years of service or this particular degree or whatever. The state's just going to step out. Leave it to the local district. They can't pay teachers less. They can't pay the same teacher less next year if this bill passes than they paid them last year if they're doing the same work. So nobody gets a pay cut. You just get more authority as a voter in your school district, your school board, your school superintendent, potentially your principals, if the school board chooses to empower principals, right? More local authority, less state diktats about teacher pay. Makes a lot of sense and also makes it harder for people who want to mislead us, right? And argue, make this claim that the legislature controls teacher pay, which isn't even true right now. They control it a little bit. But local school districts can pay teachers more, and some local school districts in Oklahoma do pay teachers more right now than the minimum salary schedule, but a lot of them just say, oh, we just pay what the state tells us to pay. And they don't tell people, it's a floor, it's not a ceiling. They pretend like it's a ceiling rather than a floor. This would make that a little bit harder. Also just, look, school districts should be able to experiment and say, maybe we want to give bonuses to people who will come to our district and teach calculus because we're having a hard time with that, but we can find lots of people to teach English, right? Whatever. I don't know. I'm willing to, I'm not going to stand here in Oklahoma City and pretend like I know what your community should do with your community schools, right? So good for Representative Caldwell. Great to see this legislation. This is up for a committee hearing today in the Oklahoma House Education Committee. Okay, what else do we have? We have this one. I'm a little ambivalent about this, but this is House Bill 3311. Representative Baker. I love the people who are behind this because there's a group of people around the country organized making this argument. Here's what they say: we should not graduate students from our high schools who cannot pass the 100-question citizenship test. If you come to the United States, you apply for citizenship, you wait 7 years, then you have to take a test. It's a very simple test. It's a very easy test. It's 100 questions, and if you pass the test, I don't know what you have to get to pass the test, but if you pass the test, I don't know, 80% or something like that, right? Then you can become a citizen. And so it's a pretty straightforward argument, right? We shouldn't be graduating people out of high school who can't pass the same test that we require of people who move to the United States and want to become citizens. So this would require our high schools to do that. It gives them a lot of flexibility in how they do that. Look, we want local control. We also want accountability. Testing is part of accountability. I think this, for me, falls in the category of accountability because it's so not onerous. It leaves a lot of autonomy with local districts. But I could understand somebody saying, look, local control in our schools, let's not do this. I think it's a good trade-off. Here, that's House Bill 3311. Require high schoolers to take the citizenship test. Maybe not even make it a mandate for graduation. Just require them to take it. By the way, it's free. So this is taking a little time out of the school day, but this is not adding an expense to local schools. Okay, so those are on the good side. Now we've got to talk about the bad side. And let me tell you about the worst kind of legislation in the Oklahoma legislature, in the Senate, in the House right now. There are lots of bills. The worst kind of legislation, right? It's bad because it's disingenuous. It's dishonest. And here's how it works, right? We in Oklahoma right now, we do not have freedom when it comes to education. Not really. We do in the sense that, look, you can go to whatever school you want if that school exists. You can also homeschool. But you have to pay for only one system. Except, right? So that's not freedom, right? If somebody said, okay, we're going to charge you a tax to give you free food. Everybody has to pay this tax. We're going to raise taxes by 20%, 30%, and then we're going to give you free food. So you can have all of the top ramen and macaroni and cheese you want, right? We're going to provide that for free for everybody. You say, well, I don't want to live off of macaroni and top ramen. Well, you still are free to go buy whatever food you want. You say, wait a second, I'm prepaying for it. Well, you're free to buy whatever food you want, right? This is the argument that people make right now in Oklahoma. Well, we have school choice in Oklahoma. If you can go wherever you want, you can homeschool your kids. And a lot of parents obviously look at that, especially single parents look at that and say, wait a second, right? Homeschooling my kids may not be practical. I may not have enough money for private school, and you're forcing me to pay for a system that doesn't meet my kids' needs, right? That's not freedom. Don't let anybody claim that that's freedom. That's totally bogus. Anybody who actually believes that's freedom they wouldn't know freedom if it hit them in the face, right? That's not freedom. So we do have, though, right? We have some private schools, right? We have homeschooling. We also have charter schools, right? We have magnet schools, charter schools, different kinds of programs in the public school system. So we have at least started to allow some diversity within public education, right? I mean, the charter schools are public schools. Some people don't seem to understand that, which I don't know. Charter schools are public schools. They're public schools. They're part of the public school system. So the worst kind of legislation goes to these schools where people are making a choice, whether it's a private school, whether it's a public charter school. They never go to the public traditional status quo schools, right? But they go to these other schools and they say, we're not sure you're doing a good job. The politicians need more control over you. And here's why this is perverted. That might sound like, well, if you're educating, if you're running a charter school or you're educating kids at a private school, but you're using some tax dollars that flow through the Lindsey Nicole Henry Scholarship to provide education to a foster kid or to a special needs kid, well, why wouldn't we want the politicians to have more control over those schools? But here's what gets missed. Nobody goes to those schools by default. Right? We have default schools. The status quo school system is the default school system. Everybody's forced to pay for it, and by default, that's where people go. Right? And it is a monopoly on the funding side, and it is a kind of a monopoly on the other side, right? Because for a lot of people, they really functionally don't have a choice. So it is a clear monopoly on the funding side, partly a monopoly on the service side, right? Monopolies need more regulation. Monopolies need more accountability, right? When you don't have choice, you do need more regulation, right? It's like back in the era of taxi monopolies. If you're going to have taxi monopolies, you actually need more regulation of taxis. As soon as Uber and Lyft show up, you don't need as much regulation because people are making choices. I can choose Uber, I can choose Lyft, I can go out and wander around for a regular taxi, right? As soon as that happens, as soon as we have choices, you don't need as much control by politicians. And there's a good argument that we didn't really need as much control by politicians as maybe there was in the past, right? But that's another argument for another day that we can have with, the people who operate taxi cartels, right? So this kind of legislation, this disingenuous, dishonest legislation says, and let me give you the best example of this, and then I'll give you another one. The best example of this is a bill that says, to schools that are educating special needs kids through the Lindsey Nicole Henry Scholarship Program, you have to prove to a politician that you're doing a good job, right? Why is the kid in that school? The kid is in that school because a parent or guardian has made a choice and has actually had to do some work. They've actually had to go and find the school, find out about the school, apply for the school, get the kid into the school, get the Lindsey Nicole Henry Scholarship. They've invested a whole bunch of, not to mention the fact that this is their child, but they've invested a whole bunch of effort in this. And think of the arrogance, think of the elitism, think of how disgusting it is to have a politician come along and say to that parent, we're not sure you're making a good choice. We think we need more paperwork. We think we need more control by politicians and bureaucrats. Because even after the parent does all that work, goes through all that effort, we know better than you. Right? The disdain, the elitism just drips from that. Right? We also see legislation. So this is the worst kind of legislation, is trying to reach into, whether it's Lindsey Nicole Henry schools, whether it's Opportunity Scholarship Fund schools, whether it's charter schools, to reach into those schools and say politicians should have more power. Politicians should have more control. Politicians know better than parents. And we're going to talk this week about, I've given you a couple of good bills because I want to focus on the good things. We're going to identify more of these bad bills. One of the bad bills I'll tell you about right now, House Bill 2556. I'm going to start off with this one because this one's just sort of petty. It says that if a teacher leaves a traditional public school to teach in a charter school, that teacher, unless that teacher waits until his or her contract is fully expired, that teacher could be taken to court by the school district. It's a threat. It's a threat. And it doesn't, you notice something? It doesn't work the other way. It doesn't say that a teacher who works for a charter school can't be hired away by a traditional public school. It doesn't talk about private schools. It doesn't talk about just leaving teaching altogether. It doesn't talk about going to tech. It doesn't talk about anything. It singles out charter schools. House Bill 2556 singles out charter schools and says, we're going to poke you in the eye. We're going to make it harder for you to hire teachers. We're going to scare teachers. We're going to threaten teachers with lawsuits if they go work in a charter school. Pure animosity, right? Hostility in this legislation. And this is, look, this is one example. I'm going to give you more this week. There are lots of bills like this. We're going to talk about who these legislators are. It's embarrassing to us, I think, as Oklahomans that we have. I mean, look, if people are against school choice, they should stand up and say, we think parents are idiots. We think politicians know better. I mean, fine, there are some folks out there who say that. There's a group of left-wing pastors in Oklahoma who I saw they sent a letter out over the weekend, and that's their position. They think, I mean, you know, look, they're all elitists, right? They're the kind of, they're the kind of people who Dietrich Bonhoeffer had to deal with in the late 1930s, right? Who claim this moral authority because somebody somewhere made the poor choice to ordain them as ministers, and then they say, we're going to partner up with the politicians. We're going to partner up with the politicians because we're elitist pastors, they're elitist politicians, and we're going to make sure we don't let Oklahomans do, foolish things like make decisions about where they send their kids to school. Right? So we're going to talk about who are these politicians, who are some of the players, what's some of the legislation. I'm going to make sure I focus on some good things, some bad things. We're going to talk about choices and freedom because that's what we do here on the Trent England Show. Thank you so much for watching. Please share this program. I mean, look, this is information that Oklahoma parents need to have. I'll end with this. Oklahoma parents do have choices right now, even though politicians are trying to interfere. Every special needs student in Oklahoma has access to the Lindsey, Nicole, Henry Scholarship Program. If they have an individual education program, if they have an IEP program, if you know a kid like that, they have access to this. Now, maybe they're in a traditional public school and that's the best place for them, and that is great, right? No school choice advocate is ever going to be against that. This is the moral asymmetry of this debate, right? School choice advocates look at kids in public schools who are thriving and say, that's great, that's wonderful. And then they look at kids in public schools who aren't thriving and they say, we should find something better for those kids. We should open some doors. Actually, we shouldn't find it, right? We should open doors for those kids and allow them, allow their parents, allow people who care for them to explore what the best option is for those kids. The school choice opponents say, we know better all the time, right? And if you have enough money, you can buy your way into some other system. A lot of school choice opponents actually send their kids to private schools, which is why they oppose school choice, because they already have school choice. And then they turn to the other side of town and say, let them eat cake. But kids do have choices right now. Oklahoma has some charter schools, online charter schools. Oklahoma has private school choice scholarships through the Opportunity Scholarship Fund and other scholarship programs that are focused on, if you have thought as a parent or a grandparent, if you thought, I really need to get my kid into a different educational setting, but I can't afford it, there are scholarships out there. And you can go to osfkids.org and you can find, that's just one source, but that's the one I know. You can find out about these scholarship programs, right? There are options. This is what we celebrate on the Trent England Show. We believe in freedom, and we believe in parental rights, and we believe in customizing education for kids. And we're going to keep talking about it this week, and the state budget, and taxes, and everything else that's important to us in Oklahoma. We're going to be hitting it all this week on the Trent England Show. Thanks for watching.